What up? Salo Falava, Olo Uingoa O, Estella. My pronouns are she, her, sis, and uso.
What's good, fam? ¿Cómo está? Gabriel here. My pronouns are he, him.
If you're just joining us for season 2, welcome. And if you are back, much alofa and gratitude for your continued support.
And to reintroduce myself, I'm Gabriel Anthony Tanglau, first generation born Filipino educator, union activist out here on the East Coast, New Jersey to be exact, North Jersey to be more exact, upon land that was cultivated by Lenape people prior to European colonization. I now work full-time in our labor movement with the New Jersey Education Association.
And again, I am Estella Uima Church, daughter of immigrants by way of Sabah Samoa in Calabar, Nigeria. I am a secondary theater teacher, union leader, and artist laboring on unceded Tanglau land, known to most folks as Los Angeles.
And this is season 2, episode 4, focused on the labor movement, unions, and collective action. This season, Estelle and I have been taking time to catch up with each other and discuss the importance of healing and self-care, reflecting on this critical moment in education post-pandemic. And today, we're going to dive into the topic of our labor movement and the role we have in the larger movements for racial and social justice. And, you know, in this moment, we're seeing a corporate ed reform, anti-union force begin to really weaponize a variety of different tactics against us, including this anti-CRT narrative. For those of you who don't know that acronym, it's critical race theory. And really, you're seeing that push to further divide school communities and even our union labor solidarity on issues of race. So for a question to start us off, how ready do you think our unions are, Estella, for this new wave of attacks, specifically focused in racial equity?
I don't think we're ready. And I think these people who are behind the attacks pick the perfect moment and strategy to come after our entire field when we have been struggling to hold our communities together throughout this pandemic. And so that was, I guess, smart on their part, but not to say that we don't have the skill set or the tools or the people to push back. But I think we are burning out, and just exhausted. The amount of time since March 2020 that union leaders have spent at bargaining tables to protect our basic necessities and rights is astounding to me. Like, union meetings or these bargaining meetings are going to like the AM into the next morning. And folks are tired, and those are the full release people. So then you've got folks like myself who are in the classroom full time, but then also are committee chairs and things, and those meetings taking up summer, taking up weekends, taking up your nights after school. We feel the urgency. And so we know that our membership is the union. And so as many of us as possible, we step up to the plate and try to get the job done, but there's not much energy left to be spent. And that's what I'm worried about.
I appreciate you sharing that. Between bargaining, meetings, planning, taking up more time and energy, even though we know it's necessary, even though we recognize the moment just after the year, after the pandemic, as we talked about in previous episodes, and you and I have talked about offline, you know, it is almost a perfect time for our opponents to strike and strike at us, rather. And part of it, too, with those of us who are engaged in this racial equity and racial justice work, too, there's a compounding toll that's been taken on us over this pandemic moment. So I also question, how ready are we for this new wave of attacks? I'm hoping that, we are taking the time to prepare ourselves, but I feel you, Estella. And, one of the things that we recognize is that education unions in particular are vital to justice movements. The labor movement at large, of course, has historically played a part in various economic and social justice movements throughout history. But I was thinking about when I first started to get involved with the union in 2014, it was after about 4 years of really staying focused on honing my craft as an educator. I started to get involved locally with a team of people, and we decided to serve our local as elected officers. We ran a campaign, won, and the engagement from that point actually escalated pretty quickly because our state and national affiliates offer a variety of leadership training and professional development opportunities that just fed me and helped me continue to grow as an educator, be more effective as a local leader, and just sharpen my skills and gain more tools. So the moment that I remember, though, was the 2015 NEA Representative Assembly. And for our listeners who are not familiar, that's one of our democratic gatherings, our annual democratic gatherings, where we set policy as a national association. But I remember it was such a beautiful moment because I had no idea. I couldn't wrap my mind around the scope of what is possible with educator unions until that day when I was present for the vote on new business item B, or NBIB, which was a historic moment that invited our union, the largest labor organization in the country, to address institutional racism. And that was one of those moments where I was like, Estella, I really had to wrap my mind around what this means. How much power could we collectively have to tip the scales and transform the society for generations? So you and I met through our union activism. So I wanted to ask you, what's one or more of your favorite union activist memories or moments that helped you to understand the power of our education union movement?
My growth, I guess, as a union leader happened very similarly. I was like, I'm not doing nothing else but honing my craft. First 3, 4, 5 years. And I don't even know I don't remember how I got drawn into it. I think I went to one state level conference because someone in our membership had to represent. And then from there was, you're right, all these, it was like, oh, you agreed to one. Here's a national one. Here's this one. Go to that one. I'd say one of my favorite memories is a few years back. I think 2018, my state organization awarded me with our Human Rights Award for Peace and Justice. And after I gave my speech and I walked off the stage, a whole bunch of these amazing women came up to me and it felt like I had met cousins. Like it was like a family reunion, and I met some cousins I haven't seen in a while, and we were catching up. That's what it felt like. And these women, I'm not gonna name them all, but they're some of the most well-known women across our union nationally and across our state, women of color, who like truly, truly embody and believe it takes a village and each one teach one. And they're constantly talking to our caucuses and our membership about, as soon as I open a door, you bring in somebody in right behind you. And I really feel that sense of sisterhood, community, and love from all of them. And so that's one. Another is meeting you in Denver. And what happened was I was coming through the airport and I ran into Tejas. And I didn't know who she was, or I didn't remember her, but she said, "Oh, you're the one who got the Human Justice Award or the Human Rights Award last year. I was there with so-and-so." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, you were the cousin that I met that night." And then she was like, "Well, follow me. Let's go half on this lift. Let's, get acquainted and situated. This is your first time at this conference. Let me, walk you around. Let me introduce you to everybody." And those are like my favorite moments. And then of course she introduced me to you, and instantly I was like, that's my older brother I was supposed to grow up with, and I didn't. And so those, I think, are my favorite or best memories in this labor movement.
I love those stories. And I picture that family reunion right after you get off the stage. I can feel the energy of what you described in that. And that's one of the things about the union space, I think, especially those connections that are created organically through the spaces that we navigate. And also naming that that's one of the distinct differences between our opponents and those who are endeavoring in this work in the labor movement education spaces. Our opponents are continuing to exist in these predominantly white patriarchal structures, corporate structures. And in our union space, that represents a 2/3 majority female profession, right? Having, women of color at the forefront leading our union. When you describe that, I could picture that. And also just shout out to you and all of the, recognition for the work that you do. You're dope beyond words. So much love. And I remember that moment where we had a chance to connect. So shout out to Stephanie Tejas for connecting us, one of our sisters in this work. And as we continue to think about this topic of our union spaces, it's important to name, because I want to stay focused on our opponents, and I want to name them and I want to call them out, because it's very clear that their tactics has really been to weaponize stress in different ways and wear us out, wear us down. It's a form of psychological warfare, but also implemented through policies, ed reform policies. So we've had many conversations in episodes and offline about the layered struggles that educators have faced and continue to face as we move into this new school year. And it's become clear that our opponents have found ways to weaponize that stress against educators and students and families in the forms of over-standardized testing, problematic evaluation systems, charter school takeovers in some communities, and more. And in many ways, our unions are the shields that should have our backs and protect us. And as an educator, Estella, what would you say the union could and should do better to help shield us from these stress attacks that our opponents are levying against us?
That is a really tough question to answer succinctly. One thing that comes to mind is the level or the amount of work that is on each union leader. Part of the issue is, as in any organization or group, there is a group of folks who are constantly doing the work as opposed to sharing the load. But the other thing is that, and this is sort of the blessing and the curse, those women of color who are leading, who are all about the community and each one teach one, it also seems that those women of color are pushed to carry the burden, the weight of everything that is at risk. transforming our field and our union into a racially and socially just space, defending teachers of color, defending our queer siblings, defending, like, it feels like every single issue falls on those same group of teachers or same group of union leaders. And that's really hard to accept and to sustain yourself, not only just in the labor movement, but in education, when you're the one constantly having to do all that work. And so part of me feels like one thing the union needs to do is rid itself of white supremacy culture, from forcing Robert's rules in every setting to, the sense of urgency around a lot of issues. And I get, policy moves at its rate. And so there's legislation. And so we have to act. I understand that. But there's this sort of fervor and energy around certain causes and not others that becomes really apparent. For example, when the Janice case was being decided, every state affiliate across the country was talking about nothing else but the impact of the Janice case. And when it came to anti-racist education and defending against anti-CRT attacks, it's a local here, it's a state affiliate here, it's a local there. It is not the same, like, stop everything, this is the focus that we had around Janice. And it all just points to, we are trying to, like, build this airplane while we are mid-flight, where all of these educators of color, all of these allies, socially just minded teachers are trying to uproot white supremacy within our spaces as we are using tactics of white supremacy to run meetings and our labor movement. And it does not make any sense to me. And so what ends up happening is, again, the same group of people, the same educators of color, the same folks are carrying the heaviest of loads, while just trying to, survive a pandemic and take care of your students or yourself or your families. And I think that we've got to have real honest conversations and dialogue about the way white supremacy, characteristics of white supremacy show up across our union spaces, and really go to battle and, like, rid ourselves of it.
Absolutely, fam. Thank you for sharing that. It's reminding me of the great Audre Lorde and the idea that you can't take down the master's house with the master's tools, right? If white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism are the pillars that uphold the master's house, unions can't follow the same pillars of white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And to unpack that a little more, we'll share some resources at the end, but what comes to mind in helping us to find the antidotes for the characteristics of white supremacy culture and how they show up, Tema Okun and Kenneth Jones with their work is one of the really important resources that help us do that work internally within the union spaces. But it's so present, right? It's everywhere. It permeates everything. And that's part of the work, internal and external, right? And, recognizing that we have a hand in our union. We are our union. It's not a third party entity that's external from us and what we do. I think about you and the rest of our union family that has been some of the most important driving forces to my professional growth. I get so much joy from the friendships and relationships that I've gained throughout the years. and thinking about how stress is a weapon, the joy in this justice work has been an antidote for me against some of those stress attacks. But also recognizing and staying grounded that being active in the union requires a lot of time. It requires a lot of energy. And for us to stay sustainable in this work, we need to find that balance. So, we've talked about the importance of healing and self-care earlier in the season. So a question to you building on that is, how do you and how can we start to negotiate or balance our time and energy that's required to be active in the labor movement and the time and energy that's required to fight for justice inside and outside of our union, so that we can be in a place of sustainability in this work as educators and union activists?
I'm honestly not totally sure, but I'm going to attempt to answer the question and see if I get to a clear thought. The first thing that I was thinking about is those relationships you mentioned. Quite honestly, one of the biggest reasons why I have saying no is because it's my sister and my brother asking me. You know what I mean? Like, it's my sibling saying, hey, I need help with this phone bank. Hey, I need help sending out these mass texts, and then I go, oh, of course, sis, of course, bro, I got you. And so I'm grateful for those relationships that you have talked about and highlighted. But at the same time, it is the reason why I struggle holding on to my boundaries, because I got love for it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm a do because you asked for my help and I care about you. So I got your back. What I think we need to do, and I really got to think about Robert's rules. Like, it is such a pet peeve of mine, and every union meeting, every board meeting of any like, it's all about Robert's rules. And I'm like, who the F is Robert anyway? Like, this guy is not invited. But one thing that I think about is, if we're in the habit of, and this is an anecdote to that resource you talked about, like pushing back on those characteristics of white supremacy, the agenda does not have to be set in a way where nobody had time and space to put in on it. The agenda can always make space for our continued relationship fostering and protection of our health and mental state, right? Like, when I'm chairing a committee, we start with check-ins, we start with trivia games, we start with music to set the mood, we ground in, we're doing our breath work together. And sometimes, like even Brent, my husband, is like, really, that's how you run a meeting? That seems a little strange. Like, I didn't run meetings like that in the corporate world. And I'm like, sure, but I'm tired of the way meetings have been run. Like, this does not create space for us to care for each other or center our humanity in any way if we're following Robert's rules. And so I am regularly asking folks their opinions and ideas, and I listen to everyone and I jot down those thoughts, and then I mirror back what I've heard. I ask for clarification. It's not here's the motion, let's vote on it. You know what I mean? Like, that's cool, that's democratic, I guess, but how about we really talk this thing through and make sure that everybody's creativity was heard or opinion was heard, because we might find some nuance or solution up in there that wasn't considered when the motion was made right away. And now, according to Robert's rules, we got to deal with what's on the floor before we move on, or before someone calls the question and shuts this conversation down. Like, it doesn't really create a space for dialogue, real dialogue, in the way that Pedagogy of the Oppressed talks about what dialogue should be. And so I think that maybe part of the solution to sustainability is I mean, I guess just rethinking some of the real basic structures of our union and the way policy is made, and who gets to have a say. Just even in, I guess, the structure of the union itself, how there seems to be this odd divide between full-time staffers and classroom members. And like, you can't cross that imaginary line. And I'm like, I don't understand, because if I were to lead a training with the staffers in my state affiliate, could you imagine how dynamic that PD would be for an educator to know fully what the classroom implications are and what the labor movement implications are? Like, that's some real growth there, professional growth and collaboration, in a way that also further develops union leaders and members who were not considering moving over to the staff side or picking up some of that load from the members who are carrying the whole load. So honestly, I don't know if I have a clear answer. I'm kind of all over the place, but I definitely think we need to throw Robert's rules out the window and put it in a dumpster and set it on fire.
All of that makes sense to me, fam. I think, the ways that we conduct meetings, the ways that we handle business, the ways that we set policy are certainly modeled after the traditional ways that it's been done, which replicates white supremacy culture, patriarchal culture. And to do it differently, the way that you've described, even in meetings, right? Even meetings, it goes a long way to have inclusive practices, to really focus on relationships and humanizing, and even the products that come from it. And I don't want to reduce it to products, but the way that what emerges, that's a better way to frame it. What emerges from those meaningful conversations is much richer, is much more thoughtful, is much more effective. And also, I think back to the question around sustainability, what's more efficient, and I don't mean efficiency in the corporate sense. It's like, if we're spinning our wheels with Robert's Rules of Order, getting into the weeds of the nuances of technicalities, are we really focusing our energy on the issue at hand and addressing the issues at hand? So I think your response hits right close to home on the question of, how do we make this sustainable? And we always like to weave in some of the hip hop connection in the culture. And I'd be remiss to not lift up that Lauryn Hill has a new verse on Nas's new album, King's Disease 2. And I know you and I texted right away once the day that it dropped, like, this is the verse that must be listened to. The album itself, I do enjoy the album, of course, shout out Nas to, King's Disease 2. But Lauryn Hill's verse, she opens up with the line, "All my time has been focused on my freedom now. Why would I join them when I know that I can beat them now? They put their words on me and they could eat them now. That's probably why they keep telling me that I'm needed now. They tried to box me out while taking what they want from me. I spent too many years living too uncomfortably, making room for people who didn't like the labor or wanted the spoils, greedy, selfish behavior." Now, this conversation, that verse, those lyrics feel like they're so deeply connected. And I just wanted to lift up that excerpt from the verse, and just, it hits close to home, especially with your points on how we need to transform our own union spaces to be reflective of our values, of our inclusive practices, and again, model differently than what we've been taught and socialized to do. That's part of the work, right?
Yup. You texted me. I had to stop myself from texting because I forget about the time difference sometimes. It's like, it was 10:40 something over here. So it's in the AM for you. And I was like, I gotta text them about the break. And then first thing in the morning, you text me and I was like, bro, I was about to text you super stupid late last night, but I didn't. Stop myself. Because this verse, I was like, man, it was exactly where we were at. And I think that week we were also texting each other about Simone Biles choosing to step away and Naomi Osaka choosing to step away. And I was like, yeah, man, I'm done, and I'm totally focused on my health and my freedom and making sure that I'm transforming spaces to center my humanity, because now I realize no one else is going to do it for me. Even if my union is well-intentioned, my admin is well-intentioned, they aren't going to do it for me necessarily, or for my students for that matter. And that verse also, she says, you tried to box me out while taking what you wanted. Like, this is every meeting I raise my hand and have to be the one to say something. And because no one else thought to say it, but then they're like, oh, you're so aggressive. Oh, what you mad about? Oh, you know what I mean? To shut the conversation down, instead of actually listening to what I am saying. When I have something to say, like this verse I was just like, yup. Okay, thank you. Now you may go back into retirement and live your life peacefully, and I'll let you be, L Book.
Absolutely. I love it. I know with the time difference too, it was funny because I was like, how early can I text Estella about this verse? Because the East Coast, West Coast. I also love that we share the passion for hip hop, and that's like part of our relationship, that we can make sure to lift that up. And, as we do, and as we've been trying to do with season 2, we want to make sure that our listeners are left with some resources that they could follow up with and things like that. So before we go to our final question and wrap up our conversation here today, Stella, I wanted to shout out a couple of resources that come to mind. Rethinking Schools magazine is one of those OG magazines that have been around for a long time. They have so many rich curriculum resources. They've been doing this for decades, especially for educators who are steeped in the social and racial justice work, that are grounded in rank and file unionism, social justice unionism. But their recent book, Teacher Union and Social Justice, it's a new edition, rather. They've had this book for a while, but it's a new edition. I definitely encourage everyone to take a look at that book and check it out, particularly the 3 Pillars of Unionism chapter, where it talks about industrial unions rooted in the bread and butter issues and contract negotiation, professional unions that focus on teacher leadership and labor management collaboration, but then really focus in on social justice unionism. And what does that mean to collaborate with parents and families in the communities towards issues that are relevant to everyone in the district, and be aligned and grounded on our principles of anti-racism, racial equity, inclusion. And it's a really great resource. Also, Estella, there's an oppositional research resource that I'd like to lift up. The Powell Memo is also another resource that folks should take a look at. It was created back in 1971, I believe, but it really is the blueprint for a lot of the neoliberal movements that's happened throughout the decades. But they have a particular section that focuses on silencing educator voice. It's a fascinating read, too, because it's really recognizing how impactful charismatic educators can be in influencing and shifting culture and policy. So taking a look at that was in tandem with the Teacher Union Social Justice book, I think is a really great pairing for folks who want to look into it. But our conversation focusing on unions, Estella, I want to ask you for our final question: why unions and why now? And feel free to have at it with that, with however you want to respond in whatever direction, especially as we talk about our cultural exploration and the need for our racial justice and social justice movement to grow.
You know, what came to mind, it feels totally unrelated, but it's totally related. So to the last point you just made about charismatic educators and the power that they have, what came to my mind is Tupac, Amaru, Shakur, and the way our government systematically targeted him because of his charisma, his ability to educate folks in a way that was so about our communities, our people, and centered our humanity, and worked to break down binaries. Because he could, folks might think about him, he's gangster rap, blah, 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 whatever. It was all shoot him up, bang, bang. No, not at all. And if you know his story and his history and his struggles and the breadth of his work, then you know, absolutely not. This was a man who gave you vulnerability in a way that we don't see often with artists, hip hop artists. And he really created a space for that in and across throughout hip hop. But it was because of artists like him, they set up whole hip hop units, Vegas, New Jersey, Miami, like units to target hip hop artists who are able or capable to amass a following because of their skill as lyricists and educators. And that's what came to mind, because I think about Tupac and all of the knowledge and his activism and his artistry and the way that all of those worlds collided, plus his own personal cultural work, understanding the legacy that he was a part of, being birthed from Black Panther, a line of Black Panthers, his stepfather, his mother, his birth father, his godfather, all of these people well known in the Black Power movement, Black liberation movement. And he continued to do that work and found ways to let that intersect with his artistry. And that is essentially what I think educators of color do in classrooms every single day. Our own racial and ethnic identity development, our own cultural work, plus the expertise and the great heights and level of training and professional development we constantly put ourselves through, whether it was our bachelor's, our master's, credentialing program, and everything else we do after we've graduated to continue to learn and grow. And then we show up in our classroom spaces and we put everything on the line and we work to do our best, our most diligent to be truthful and vulnerable with our young folks. And guide them as best as we can. That is what we do. That is what, that's the connection I see there to that resource you just mentioned. Unions and why now? Because if I'm looking at history and what Tupac was put through, then I know that I am also a target. And so is every educator across the country who believes in racial justice, who believes in social justice, who centers human rights education, who thinks about trauma-informed practices, who considers the social emotional of every kid, who believes in community wraparound services and that public institution being the center of the community for anything our family needs. All of those educators are targets of neoliberalism, education reform, charters, privatizers, elected officials who have no idea what we do on a day-to-day basis. Our unions are necessary to protect us. The union has to put itself on the line in the same way I expect an ally on the front lines of a Black Lives Matter march to physically put their bodies on the line. I need my union to do the same right now and every day throughout public education for the rest of forever.
Oof. Estella, thank you for that. I have goosebumps from that because you also got me thinking about a quote by Tupac. He said, "I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world." And if Tupac said that, and if Tupac was in the classroom, he was a hip hop artist. If he was in the classroom, or rather, we have Tupacs in the classroom right now. And what is our responsibility as a union to protect those Tupac educators, the Estella educators, the Gabriel educators, all the educators out here doing this work? Yes, 100%. So Estella, I want to thank you for this conversation. This episode was fire. I'm fired up, actually. So we're good to go, and we'll wrap up the episode there.
Afatai Telalava, thank you for listening.
Salamat, thank you for listening.
We want to thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your love and your support.
Continental Shifts podcast can be found on Podbean, Apple, Spotify, Google, and Stitcher.
Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube for archived footage and grab some merch on our site.
And join our mailing list for updates at conshiftspodcast.com. That's CONSHIFTS podcast.com. And follow us at con_shifts on all social media platforms.
Dope educators wayfinding the past, present, and future.
Keep rocking with us, fam. We're going to make continental shifts through dialogue with love all together.
Fafatai, thanks again, and Tofa, deuces.
Much love. Peace.